This is a brief movie prompted by an ImageMuse posting on sRGB and Adobe RGB for web viewing color management. What you'll be seeing in this movie are the color gamuts of the 4 popular working color spaces. Here they are: sRGB, Adobe RGB, P3, that was the one that was brought up in the discussion in particular, and ProPhoto RGB. This is an application I'm using called ColorThink that allows one to visualize different working color spaces in a 3-dimensional sense. What you see here is the LAB color space. Top to bottom is dark, light, so L star going from 0 to 100. The A star component, the magenta to cyan, that's the A component, and the B component is the blue to yellow. And what this allows you to do is to see these different working color spaces and their gamuts within this color space. I will start with the sRGB by just clicking it on, and it shows not only the volume in that space, but also its projection onto a 2D space. It also allows one to rotate these, and that's what I'll do now. I'll just let it spin. Now I can move anywhere around this space, and you can see how these colors are located in this 3-dimensional volume. This is why it's so nice. So I'll just move this around and give you a different sense of where these are. Now, we know that the sRGB is fairly limited, so let's see how that compares to the next step up. More popular one these days is Adobe RGB. And basically, you'll see that the Adobe RGB simply overwhelms the sRGB. But notice on the projection on the A star, B star plane, you can still see the projection of that volume. So here goes with the Adobe RGB. I'll click that on and off so you get a better sense of what's happening. What I've done here with the Adobe RGB so that it's less confusing is I've added a little transparency to the Adobe RGB color space. And you can clearly see where the bounds, the color gamut increases relative to the sRGB. I'll do to avoid confusion, I'm going to turn off the sRGB. And because one of the components in the ImageMuse posting was how the P3 working color space compares to the Adobe RGB. So what you're seeing now is Adobe RGB. I'm now going to turn on the P3 working color space. And there you go. And indeed, as mentioned in that posting by Scott Martin, is that the reds, there's a much greater red gamut and yellow and partial green gamut to the P3. So I'm going to click that on and off just to give you a sense. But notice also that especially in the greens and this outer portion here, the cyans into the blues, the Adobe RGB has a greater and more extended gamut. So this is just an introduction to how these different working color spaces compare to one another. And I'll just rotate this a little bit more. Don't want to give anybody vertigo. So I'll click these on and off again. So this is Adobe RGB. And what I'll do, I'll add a little bit more opacity to it. And this is the P3. Adobe RGB, P3, look at the projection on the A star, B star plane. And just for completeness, I know that the ProPhoto RGB is not necessarily a well-regarded display working color space. It is worthwhile to at least show where the ProPhoto RGB working color space compares to these two. So I will click that on now. And you can see it is quite large, and it even has this little cusp down here in the blue. But of course, this doesn't apply to the posting because this is irrelevant to the actual web viewing color management subject of that posting. I'll go through these quickly again. I'll turn them all off. Here's the sRGB, Adobe RGB, P3, and ProPhoto. At that point, I'll just stop this and all comments are welcome.